All right, folks, welcome. Welcome. Good to see a nice full house tonight. I'm Corey. This is the AA County Farm Lawn and Garden Center, as you all know. All right, we are going to cover a ton of information in as short of a time as I can keep you awake, okay? When I see that first head bob, then I know it's time to wrap it up. But we have so much to cover, and I know the big encore is the straw bale, which we're going to go over in detail, but we're going to start with gardening as a whole. As I said before, do not hesitate to ask a question, please. It's very important. So when we think about gardening, and there's all different types of gardening, the bottom line is the foundation. It's like you're building a house. If you're building a garden, you're building the foundation. The house that it sits on is only as good as the foundation it's built on. So what I mean by that is soil structure becomes critical. Now, most people get upset. They say, all I have is sand. Well, sand is very manageable compared to clay. We're going to break each one of those down, but we're going to start with sand, which it seems like my family's been farming in sand for over 100 and some years. So we're going to start with sand. Sand is very mendable, okay? What do we know about sand? We know that it doesn't hold water. We know that the root system can go through fairly easy. But we also know as a whole it tends to be acidic. That means sour. Okay, just like if you've attended any of the grass seminars, you know that roots have a tendency to go sideways if the soil is acidic. Now, not everything wants it as sweet as the other when it comes to vegetables, and we're going to go over all that as well. But starting with sand, if you have pure sand and you're not a professional farmer, then you have to make a commitment to amend that soil. Now, how do we amend sand? Well, first of all, you know, I believe that pH is king, all right? Everything needs proper pH. I'm going to just list a few, and somebody will call me tomorrow and say, wait, you left beets out. Well, we're going to go with the most popular, but your tomatoes and peppers tend to have a tendency not to need the pH to be as high, okay? So whether we're talking vegetable gardening or flower gardening, for the most part, things are going to thrive between that 5.5 and that 7.0, okay? We would like to see in gardening a 6.0, okay? Peppers and tomatoes tend to like a little more acidic. Roses can take it a little more acidic. But as a whole, you want it as neutral as possible. So that 6.5 remains our target, just like it did when we had the lawn seminars. The pH is king. We know that your body needs proper pH. We know your drinking water needs proper pH. The world is centered around proper pH. So knowing that, we need to infuse something that's going to help hold moisture in that sand. Now, what can we use? Anybody have any suggestion? What can hold moisture for us in sand? All right, I'll answer my own question. All right, that's what I'm here for, right? So when you can infuse compost of any type, it's going to help bond with that sand and help feed. If it's a good compost, it's going to help feed. Now, a lot of people say, I take my leaves and I mulch them up and I throw them in my garden. Well, if you do that in the fall, that's okay. If you do that in spring, you're going to have a little more of a problem. When Mother Nature takes natural products and reduces them down into compost, she's robbing all the nitrogen out of the air and out of the soil to break that compost down. If you compost outside the garden, then you're able to manage that a little more. It doesn't have such a drain on your garden. So if you're composting on your own, you want to do it outside the garden the best you can. Now, if you do it in the fall, chances are the garden will recover in time, but you'll still have to offset the pH by adding lime. Lime sweetens it. We're looking to raise pH most of the time in sand. All right. But also, you would need to infuse some fertilizer in there to offset the demands of breaking those leaves down. Now, when you have sand, there are a million different things that you can add to sand to help it better. So when it comes to compost, there's lobster compost, there's mushroom compost, there's dehydrated manure, there's composted manure, there's mushroom, there's peat moss, anything. Leaf grow is very popular, okay? Anything that you can infuse in the sand will help hold that moisture and also provide some form of food for your plants, okay? Now, we're going to break into container gardening and all that, but for now I'm just talking about overall gardening. So, you know, you see people, they really want to go top shelf and they want to add in things like Pro Mix to your garden. Well, Pro Mix is a soilless material. This is what 99% of any plant you buy, this is what it's grown in. This is a professional, soilless, sterilized material. It's not cheap. It's really not designed to be put into the garden, but we see people doing it all the time. Of course, you have your popular brands, Miracle Grow, Potting Soil, Miracle Grow, Garden Soil, Diaspoma. That line is a very nice, a well-balanced potting soil type compost mix. When you see the term potting mix versus potting soil, potting mixes will not have any soil in them, okay? Now we're just talking about in the ground gardening for now, but if you're growing in pots, you use potting soil or potting mix. You do not use garden soil in pots. That garden soils are designed to be incorporated into the ground. As you put them in pots, they get heavy and they turn, I won't say into concrete, but they get too heavy to really support. When there are people that are doing these square foot gardens and things like that, they're using things like vermiculite, okay? Vermiculite and perlite. These are products that help hold moisture and provide aeration. Typically with sand, you don't need aeration. Your loam, when you hear the term loam, you're thinking of a very black, organically rich material. If you ever had your soil tested professionally, it will list the percentage of composted material in there. And they're referring to when they say, oh, you need to incorporate loam or you have a very nice loam, they're talking about organics that are already infused, okay? So whether you have sand or a loam, a nice black, you know, loafy kind of mix, that's what you're after. Now, we have a question that comes in all the time. Can I grow in straight compost? Can I just use leaf grow? The problem is, the answer is no, okay? You don't want to grow in straight compost. You want to have some form of stability for that plant to hold on to. Not to say that leaf grow and compost are not good materials to have, but they're really not designed for that type of feeding. But the more you can have in there, and I like to see, personally, I like to see in gardening at least a 50% topsoil mix. Let's say 1/3 sand, 1/3 topsoil, and 1/3 compost is typically enough to support you. Do not be misled by compost. It typically does not have enough oomph to get you through. And what I mean by oomph, not enough food to provide you with the type of vegetables or fruit or flowers that you're looking for. It's going to help condition the soil, but it's not enough to get you the end result that you really want to. Now I'm going to get some phone calls on that when somebody watches this video in the morning and they'll say, oh, I've grown sweet potatoes in pure compost forever. Yes, you have. Yes, you have. But as a whole, we're talking about your ability to create a garden that you want. Keep in mind, we talked about the foundation. So this is a chance to get it right. And that's why the soil testing is so important. You hear me preach about pH all the time. This is a chance for us to get it right. All right, we cover sand, we cover topsoil. Now we're talking about that evil stuff, clay. All right. So clay, you've heard me make reference to clay as that person you know that is probably a nice guy or a nice woman or a nice person, I should say, but they can't relax. They're just too uptight. Well, that's what clay is. It's bound so hard together. It won't release. It won't relax. It's like growing in concrete. And normally clay is bound with a lot of energy. And clay can have proper pH. But it's the cousin to concrete in terms of growing. So there are some people that believe that by adding sand can help clay. You have to watch that proportion because it doesn't always work the way you want to, and you really have created a mortar mix, a concrete mix. The best way truly to deal with clay is to infuse as much compost into it. Give it a reason to relax a little bit. Get a little nip just to relax, okay? So if you can incorporate the compost into the clay, it does tend to help long term. Now, there are products like gypsum that are designed to lessen the compaction of clay. It is somewhat debatable whether or not it works. We have always used it for years. We have always felt comfortable, but now there's that other side. As we talked about before, don't eat more chicken, don't eat beef, and then next year it'll be eat more beef, don't eat chicken. So for right now, the question is out on gypsum. We've always felt comfortable with gypsum, that it works. So a lot of people say, well, I got a big clay garden, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to just scoop it all out, and I'm going to just put whatever compost Corey tells me to put in there. Well, all you've created is a large bowl of which things are going to fill up with water and drown your plants. That is not the easiest solution. Growing in clay is tough. If you have clay, it's going to be a work in progress. It's not going to be your typical walk in the park like you would if you had sand or loam. Any questions there? All right, so we go back to the pH again. What raises our pH? I know you know, lime, that's right. Yep, I am the king of lime. I believe in pH, and that's the rule. So that deals with the sweetness of your soil and the ability of your plants to be able to take in the nutrients that you're feeding it. No matter what you decide to use, whether you think you have enough compost and you're going to just feed it compost and see what happens, if you go man-made, if you go organic, whatever you need, whatever you're comfortable with, whether it's liquid or granular, that pH is critical, okay? So a lot of people ask me, should I plant seeds or should I do plants? All right, there are a ton of vegetables, I'm going to center around vegetables, that are so much easier to let a professional grow to start for you. All right, I'm not raining on anybody's parade, but if you are a successful tomato grower from seed or a successful pepper grower from seed, I need you to talk to me because I'm going to buy everything you have left over. Starting peppers and tomatoes are not the easiest, all right? It really does take a little more trained eye. It's a good experiment to start, but most of the time, I believe it's easier to buy a pepper or a tomato already started. Chances are it's been pruned properly, it's been raised properly, it's not lanky, you won't run into those kind of things that you get when you try to grow your own seed. Things like cucumber, anything in the curbit family, your cucumber, your squash, those pumpkins, those kind of things are just too easy to grow by seed. Now, these are all my personal opinion, but within days, you put a seed in, and typically the plant responds, the seed responds. Yes, ma'am?
Plants that they're sowing for the tomatoes and everything, are they coming out with the organic plants or just organic?
Well, the problem, and believe me, we're big organic people. We believe in organic. I like to believe we have the largest selection of organics, certainly in the county, if not in the state, across the board. You can buy organically produced seeds, okay? There are organically grown suppliers of vegetable plants, okay? They're, the availability is not as large as you think. Unfortunately, the timing for organics, if you want to hear this report from the Department of Agriculture, the timing for the push for everyone to go to organics kind of collided with the collapse of the economy. Okay, so everybody was gung-ho. I'm going to eat organically. I'm going to have organically raised chicken. I'm going to do organically raised vegetables. And it just happened to coincide with our collapse in the mid-2000s. So that growth spur did not hit the peak. Now, chances are it may come back, and it's not to say that it's not large, because it is large. Organic gardening, organic farming has gotten larger. This farm-to-table concept that's on right now, it's very, very large. But unfortunately, the collapse of the economy set those projections back. And what it comes down to, just so I can explain myself, when the pinch came on, and not all of you felt the pinch, but I'm teasing. But when the pinch came on, you had to decide, am I going to pay $1.50 for this pepper, or am I going to pay $2.99 for this pepper? And unfortunately, the American public decided, I'm going to eat this $1.50 pepper, okay? And that's not to say wrong or right, but you know the world was upside down, and people were just not sure of what was going to happen next, and it stands to reason. It will rebound. It will end up meeting the projections, I'm sure, of 2020, 2025. We'll get back in line with that. But we have organic seeds available here, and we have every organic product you can imagine here as well. Okay, so it's not for me to decide what's easier for you, but as a whole, like string beans and things like those are just too easy to put in the ground and they'll wake up in 3 to 4 days if the weather's right. So that, that's something that you have to decide on your own on that one. We get the timing of things, as you probably heard before, my two older brothers are commercial farmers, very successful commercial farmers in the county. And for years they used to grow most of my plants for me. And as we've all gotten older, we have other things to worry about. But they used to laugh and say, when you're supposed to plant your tomatoes, you've already sold 20,000 tomatoes. So we would always sell, like right now, we're under a lot of criticism that we do not have as many tomatoes here, tomato plants in stock right at this moment that we should. The thing is, there's a safe date in Maryland, which is Mother's Day. That is, but you cannot tell anybody. You'll walk in here in February, and you'll see that we have tomato plants in February. And somebody said, what are you doing with tomato plants? Well, I have to have tomato plants in February because people want tomato plants in February. They are truly for the greenhouse people, the cold frame people, and the people that are experimenting hydroponically and so forth. But the true safe date for your non-cold crops, and I'd like to get this one straight. The term cole is C-O-L-E, like coleslaw, not C-O-L-D. And even I learned that one by being here for 23 years. I always thought it was cold crops. The cold crops can handle the cold, okay? So your lettuces and your radishes and your collard greens and kale and spinach, those are cold crops. Those are cold. They can handle the actual cold, and they're safe to be planted. Yes, ma'am. Well, I can start from the top. It would be spinach. It would be kale. It would be collards. It's lettuce. It's your mustard greens, your broccoli, your cabbage. Any of those are safe before Mother's Day. Now, you know yourself, for 2017, we have seen it all already in our first 4 months. We've seen a 70-degree February followed by an 18-degree, couple days in March. Okay, so you always have that up and down. That temperature, why we say Mother's Day is the safest date, because that is supposed to be the last frost date for Maryland, okay? Now, your lettuces can take the hit and your cabbage can take the hit, but you don't want to put them under any more stress than you have to, okay? So by gambling and putting your tomatoes down is fine, but to know that there are certain temperatures, once you get under 45 degrees on a lot of different vegetable plants, it's deadly to them, okay? 42, when you get in the 42 range on some things like tomatoes, you'll see, if you stop here early in the morning and on a cold morning, you'll see our watermelon plants and our cucumber plants, they look like they just want to, move to Florida on us. They want to lay over, but as soon as it warms up, they bounce back. That little bit of shock is nothing compared to having a super cold night. And that's why, truly, Mother's Day is the safest date for most of your peppers, tomatoes, things like that. Okay? But the point I was trying to make with my brothers, we would be sold out by the time we should be selling our tomatoes. But that could be worse. We could be overloaded. So let's move on if we can. Any questions about seeds and plants in general? I got one right behind. Yes, ma'am.
I just had a question, maybe we can go over this later, but I do grow everything from seed and
Good.
I keep it in the house and then plant it.
Good.
And take it in and out each day, but I don't know if you would know this, but I have tomato plants and some of them grow to be like this tall and then they stop, they
Right.
fall over.
They get lanky on you. Yeah, they're following the sun. Right. So they're following your light source.
Well, they got like they
Oh, it's dampening off? Okay, that's called dampening off. So the question is, she raises a lot of seeds, plants by seed, and she's noticed that the plant will get tall and lanky and then just kind of fade away. That's called dampening off. It happens typically from, there's a couple different factors that come into play, but mostly too much water for the most part, okay? And we're going to get into that watering thing, and you'll be shocked when we get to that. One second. Yes, sir.
I was just wanted to know, is it a good idea to put a seed in the water the night before that you want to plant it the next day?
The question is, should you put the seed in the water the night before? That has been used forever and a day, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that depending on the size of the seed and what you're dealing with. But typically, that's been used forever and a day. This is a true story. My grandparents used to plant lima beans by the light of the moon and also would only put them with the belly button up. But that's when people had patience, and those days are long gone. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
There are some vegetables I've read that don't transplant well, so you should be planting. Some
Right.
I'm always forgetting which those are.
Well,
Which ones would you never want to start by seed in the house or by?
right. So the question was, there are some varieties of vegetables that do not transplant well. A lot of times it's your smaller seed, like anything that's fragile to handle, basically. I mean, as soon as I list, if I say lettuce, then somebody's going to call in tomorrow and say, oh, I transplant lettuce all the time, So it's always a matter of opinion. But your finer things like celery and things like that have a tendency. Radishes would be one where, they want them in the ground and thinned out in the ground per se than transplanting. If you have the time and the patience, you can basically you can transplant anything, but as a whole, there's a lot of things that don't like to be disturbed. Corn is one, doesn't really like to be overly disturbed when it's planted. Alrighty, we're all good here? Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about the different selections. We talked about gardening in the ground and what we need to do. Of course, the popular move now is raised beds, okay? And of course, it makes sense. Your soil is terrible. You've been overrun by the rabbits, and you think by going on top ground is a good way to do it. It does save your back, of course, and it is a chance for you to start over, meaning that you can get that foundation right. You can get that combination of topsoil and compost and your goodies all mixed together. There's nothing wrong with that. The earth box, don't know if you're familiar with the earth box, but this has grown in popularity. This is a soilless. Once again, you would use a soilless mix to go in here. It's a tube apparatus that uses liquid fertilizer Very popular. They can last for years. If it's great for patio growing. They I have a lot of vendors that watch these YouTube ads, so I have to watch what I say. I was not in favor of this. I live on a large farm in Odenton, and my wife brought one home, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. We're going to raise tomatoes on our deck, right? When I have this farm, which I'm never at because I'm always here. But I was amazed by it. I truly was amazed. When you think about the fact that it's off the ground, when you think that you're controlling all the different factors that affect plant growth, meaning that you're feeding it, it's feeding itself for the most part, not a lot of weeds. I was put in my place. I was definitely corrected on that. Not an inexpensive device, a little bit on the pricey side, even here at the co-op, but I stand corrected by saying I was amazed. And the fact that it can be used anywhere and moved anywhere is what I like the most. We're gonna, yes ma'am.
Can you grow root crops in there?
Can I what?
Can you grow root crops?
You know, it's labeled for it. I have no experience with root crops in there. You're looking at a solid 8 inches, which would stand to reason. What do you have in mind? Carrots?
The voles and bulls would have to be
Oh yeah, the moles and voles would, yeah. So the question was, can we grow root crops in the earth box? And the answer is yes. And these lovely folks have a terrible time with moles and voles. And we're going to get into the pests and the insects a little bit later. But yes, the answer would be you could. And once again, growing up with my feet in Anne Arundel County soil, I was against this unit, but it proved me wrong over and over. And of course, it's selective in what you want to put into it, just like the straw bale. There are certain things that are going to excel where certain things will not do as well. All right. One of my favorite questions that come through the doorway here is, do vegetables need a lot of sunlight? And I love it. I love it. And it takes a lot after 30 years of doing this not to smile and say, have you ever been past a farm? There's only one shade tree, and that's in the front of the man's house, all right? They need as much sunlight as possible, okay? And I see by the look on some of the faces here, they're like, oh my gosh, I asked Corey that question years ago. All right, I forgive all of you. Here's the thing. There are vegetables that will do better in somewhat shade. Any of your leafy material, you know, if you've ever had broccoli bolt on you, which means it sends up a leader and goes to seed. If you've ever come home from work and you saw your lettuce was just scorched and you know, and burnt up, yes, you can grow in partial shade, but you will always grow better in full sunlight. And that will prove to be the same with the straw bale as well. All right, we're going to get into fertilizers a little bit. Now, there are a lot of different types of fertilizer. We know, hopefully, we know what the 3 numbers mean. I told you a rhyme over and over and over. The numbers mean up, down, and all around. That's how you try to remember what these fertilizer numbers mean. The first one is nitrogen, second one is phosphorus, and the third one is potash. Nitrogen, up,